G'day guys, how you doing? It's the Kiwi and I'm back with another video. In this video I'm going full disclosure. Over the last couple of weeks we've all seen a huge amount of chatter online in regards to the whole sex trafficking, pedophilia, child sex trafficking deal that's been going down. And the people that were involved with the making of the movie and all that sort of stuff. However, there's something they're not talking about. There's one specific subject point that I have not heard mentioned, and I've watched a dozen or more videos in regards to this whole subject, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. I'm putting my balls out there, guys. I'm going out there because this is definitely going to piss some people off, big time. But first and foremost, we need to go back to 2010. I was in Odessa in the Ukraine. We're taking care of some stuff out there back then, and I had a personal driver per se. He was having a limo driver. He was a cabbie. His name was Victor. Ex-Soviet Navy, became a merchant, seaman, traveled the world, all that sort of stuff as a sailor. And whatever I needed, he was on call. I could get him. He'd take me to wherever I needed to be taken, and we'd go there and they'd be like, "Hey, Victor, Mashallah Jakova, Vosam va," you know, let's go. So the interesting thing was, over the few days I was around Victor, I got to talk to him about a bunch of different subjects and everything like that. And one of them subjects that came up was about the whole sex trafficking ring that was going on in Odessa at the Ukraine at the time. And I was just like, what are you talking about, dude? And he explained to me about how Odessa in the Ukraine was the hotbed for a bunch of sex trade, sex trafficking, but basically they'd get women that had been kidnapped from different areas around the Ukraine and then put up for auction. And then they would end up being flown out to certain countries. One of the major purchasers or buyers of these females was actually the Saudi royal family. Can't make this shit up. So what I started to realize as I started to move forward in my life, etc., I started to realize that for a lot of this illicit stuff to go on, there's got to be gatekeepers, right? There's got to be gatekeepers. For super high profile, super wealthy families and individuals to get away with this stuff, you've got to have gatekeepers. You have to. Well, lo and behold, a few years later I was around an individual, and that individual laid out the global power structure. This individual was actually part of one of those families. And that individual had this really, really old piece of parchment paper. And I mean, this piece of parchment paper, hundreds of years of age, and it was all laid out like the family tree of the power structure of the world, from the round table of these families down to the organizations that would do their footwork, their companies, their corporations, the banking, and then government. Government is the lowest level of the power structure, by the way. And what I started to realize was that there was a group of gatekeepers. There's a group of individuals that actually allowed this stuff to happen, allowed this stuff to go on. So who is one of the major groups of gatekeepers? Do you want to know? I've been bringing these guys up in other videos. And that's what I mean. By doing what I'm doing now, I'm going to piss some people off. I know that for a fact. But here, anyway, I've shown you this book before in other videos. These guys, the high degree guys, the real high degree guys, are the gatekeepers. Now what's interesting is let's just take it back a little bit. Who is the main group of individuals that is in charge of these guys? If there's one specific group of individuals or one specific family that these guys are answerable to, who would it be? It's the British Crown. Straight up, the British Crown. Who gave the Wahhabis this Arab peninsula? And by the way, the Wahhabis, you might want to research who the Wahhabis are, but they're now the Saudi royal family. There's nothing royal about them at all. However, it was the British Crown that gave the Wahhabis the Arab peninsula. It was also the British Crown that gave these guys Palestine. Now I have to use a cue card like this primarily because of the fact that there's certain individuals now that are protected on media platforms, which is absolutely insane, which should really give you another little bit of insight into who these gatekeepers are. Now what's interesting is that these guys are really deeply embedded with these guys. How did that happen? Huh? Well, you got to go back to who the first sheriffs were. Who were the first people that were utilized as tax collectors in England and Europe by the royal and noble families? It was a specific race of people because they believed in usury. It's true. The reason why we pay taxes today is because of those people. It's true. Because the royal and noble families of Europe and Britain and what have you, they realized that they weren't getting enough money from the churches. It's true. So they started to utilize their court jesters, of all things, started to become the sheriffs and went around tax collecting. Now what I'm about to tell you, I can't make this up either. Here in Los Angeles County and Ventura County, if you're a sheriff's cadet, guess what you have to do as part of the training? This is more like brainwashing and propaganda, but as part of their training, sheriff's cadets in Los Angeles and Ventura County have to go to the Museum of Remembrance, or otherwise known as the Holocaust Museum. Yeah, those ties between a specific group of individuals and another specific group of individuals are very, very tight. Very tight. These are your gatekeepers. It's true. You see, once you start looking around the world and you start looking into the different countries that allow, let's say, the likes of Sean Reyes, the Attorney General of Utah, and his task force to go and investigate this child sex trafficking and pedophilia rings and everything like that, you start to see which countries are open to it and which countries aren't. The countries that aren't open to it, by majority, are ruled by these guys. Yeah, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United States, Britain, Europe. Yeah. Now what's interesting, I just contacted a buddy of mine who is kind of works for New Zealand's version of Homeland Security, and they do zero investigation into the child sex trafficking that goes on in New Zealand. New Zealand and the Cook Highlands is a hotbed for child and sex trafficking out of China. Now, you'd be amazed the amount of females that are sold into sexual enslavement that pass through New Zealand and the South Pacific. Can't make it up. So, when you start to realize that these guys right here, these guys, they're in your government. They're the lawmakers. They're in your state governments. Just here in California, the California government's completely and utterly knocked down a bill protecting children from pedophilia. Basically, California's made pedophilia legal. I mean, that's insanity. Absolute insanity. Why aren't these lawmakers being arrested for even having these thoughts? Well, we've got freedom of speech here in the United States. Okay, well, why aren't these people in office at least being watched? You've got some seriously sick individuals out here. And not just in the United States, we're talking New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Europe, Russia, Ukraine. Ukraine right now, oh my God, with the war in the Ukraine going on right now, the amount of children that are going missing is unbelievable right now. But you see, when you have gatekeepers that are your lawmakers, and then you have gatekeepers that are the heads of sheriff's departments, like the entire sheriff's department or the entire police department of cities, and the lawmakers that are in charge of your states that are in bed with these individuals. They're getting paid off by incredibly wealthy people to turn a blind eye. I mean, when you look at, let's say, the likes of the Saudi royal family, okay, and they've got their own airline, Emirates. Gee, I wonder how many children end up in the cargo hold of their own airline. I mean, seriously. Who's investigating the Saudi royal family's Emirates airline when it lands in countries like New Zealand? When New Zealand was locked down, there's only 2 airlines flying in and out of New Zealand. It was Air New Zealand and Arab Emirates. Is there anybody investigating anything that's in the cargo holds of those aircraft? Is there any sort of investigation of any sort? I know nobody's going to be examining them when they get to, Dubai or Abu Dhabi or wherever else. Sure as hell ain't going to be investigating anything that's in the cargo holds in New Zealand, because it's pretty obvious that New Zealand's balls deep in with this sex trafficking stuff also. And I know that for a fact because my buddy is a member of one of the task force of Sean Reyes, the state attorney of Utah. I'm always in communication with the dude. I know exactly what's going on with this stuff. And it's out of hand. So if you really, really, really want to change this stuff, one of the things that has to happen is the lower degree guys of this group here, the lower degree guys, they need to start taking a real serious look at themselves. Because all you lower degree guys amongst these fellas, you're just there for being basically brainwashed, and the higher degree guys are seeing just who they can pluck and pick and take away. I've already experienced that when I was down in New Zealand. My father was one of these fellas, and I had a couple of guys that were the gatekeepers in our hometown, and they drilled the living shit out of me in regards to what I knew and what I didn't know. And when I told the main guy, who was a high degree, one of these fellas, and also the head of a banking organization in Australasia for a number of years. Gee, how ironic is that? Once I told him I had this in my hands, he pretty much just left me alone. Jacinda Ardern, one of the most criminally negligent prime ministers New Zealand has ever had. Who gave her scholarship to Europe, to Britain? That just goes on and on and on and on and on. I mean, straight up. These guys are the heads of corporations, heads of sheriff's departments, police departments. They are the heads of the FBI, CIA. They are in the Pentagon. They are in militaries. They are in everywhere. They are in everything. It's the only way that this stuff can go on. How in the name of God can you transport hundreds of thousands of people globally and nothing happens? What Sean Reyes is doing with his, and oh God, I forgot the guy that was in the movie The Sound of Freedom. Tim Ballard? I can't remember. Sean Ballard? I can't remember. Sorry about that. But anyway, the reality of the situation is that's just a small little section. These guys are literally right now fighting a losing battle. So it's up to you, the public, to actually start doing something about this. It's up to the lower degree guys, as far as this stuff is concerned, to do something about it. I mean, seriously, Jeffrey Epstein, a known pedophile, okay? US congressman knew exactly what Jeffrey Epstein was up to. Congressman knew exactly what he was doing. And nothing happened until Trump got into power. It was once Trump got into power that stuff started to happen and Epstein was arrested. I can tell from my own gut instinct, from what I know from being around this stuff and people that work in regards to trying to stop this stuff, I can tell you right now that Epstein was Mossad. Mossad. I mean, who in the hell is Mossad? And remember that these guys are balls deep in bed with these guys. I mean, when Epstein was wheeled out of the security or the jail in New York with the blanket off him, that was a human being that was still alive. He wasn't dead in any way, shape or form. Have you ever seen a human being that's been hung? It ain't a pretty sight in any way, shape or form. Once you get that rope around your neck and the blood's being pumped up into your head, it can't get out. So your heart is forcing that blood up into your head. And the pressure builds and builds and builds, and your eardrums burst. Blood pours out of your ears. Your eyes pop out of your head. Blood. Your tongue becomes swollen. It's unbelievable what a human being looks like that's been hung. Unreal. Jeffrey Epstein didn't hang himself. In actual fact, he still had a perfectly tan face. The only way a known pedophile like that could possibly get away with what he's gotten away with is gatekeepers. Why do you think the media is attacking this movie, The Sound of Freedom, like nothing else on earth? Gatekeepers. Who runs, by majority, who runs the US media? New Zealand's media, Australia's media, yeah, Canada, you name it. It's these guys. Nothing to see here. Disney. It's owned by these guys. How long did Disney have that movie, The Sound of Freedom, sitting on its table? 5 years. All the people that are coming out against this are guilty of being pedophiles. They are allowing this stuff to happen. They are allowing this stuff to continue. They are allowing our children to be raped and murdered. Yeah, a lot of these poor kids get murdered, as do the women that go into sex trafficking in the sex trade industry. It's a serious issue. It's a really, really serious issue. So keep that in mind when you're voting for the next politician or your next congressman or whomever. In all sincerity, these guys here need to take a real serious look at themselves. A real serious look at themselves. Especially the lower degree guys. Because I can tell you right now, God has you sick motherfuckers motherfuckers in his crosshairs. And by God, we're going to get you. That's it.